Chairman, you said that you think that there is a multi-prong approach that's needed to deal with the situation of the crisis. And would you agree that addressing the root causes of migration with foreign aid is one of those prongs?
Yes.
And I think you testified that there's a temporary freeze on this kind of aid, something in the order of 450 million. So, what was the explanation for the temporary freeze on the aid to these countries?
Concerns that it was not being applied effectively to actually meet the
So-
purposes of the legislation and the appropriation.
It could take a long time for the administration to figure out that this aid is not being appropriately utilized. So in the meantime, we're not getting on with what we need to do, which I think is, as you testified earlier, that we do need to get to the root causes of what prompts so many of these families to come to our country seeking asylum. So this is a long-term kind of a commitment on our part to enable them to become much more economically strong, to institute a rule of law, to end corruption. So it's going to take years. I think that part of what was tried was in Colombia, where our country sent a lot of aid, and now Colombia's economy is stronger, and we don't see the kind of situation that would prompt the Colombians to come to our country. So, I think that others of my colleagues have talked about how important the continuation of aid is, with appropriate parameters, of course, and that is up to us to establish and make sure that those parameters are followed. So, since you acknowledge that this will require a multi-pronged approach, not just changing the laws, and we have different views on that point. Do you think that the Trump administration is following a multi-pronged approach to good effect?
I think so. And if I could just clarify that the freeze that's undertaken right now has not yet affected some of the key programs that have been in process and funded under prior year appropriations. We have months to assess which programs are working, and that's going to ultimately be the Secretary of State's recommendation, the President's determination.
So how much of the 500 million or so in aid that we generally provide is being provided at this point?
I'll reach out to the Department of State to make sure the committee has that information.
I'm kind of surprised that you did not anticipate that we would ask these kinds of questions, because you had testified earlier that it's really important for us to get to the root causes. So there have been times when you have, with probably all good intentions, to provide us with information, and then we don't get that information. So I, for one, think that a multi-pronged approach is really necessary. I agree with you on that, and I think that we're not doing enough on getting to the root causes, so there's that. Senator Feinstein asked you how many children have been separated from their parents since June of 2018. Last year, you said you didn't know the exact number, so this is after the zero-tolerance policy was ended. So doesn't CBP keep track of the children that it has separated from after the zero-tolerance policy?
We do. We keep careful track.
But
we
you
have
are
that
not
number.
able to
I gave you the
show it.
percentage this morning, but we'll get you the exact number.
Well, so that's another thing, because you know that the zero-tolerance policy resulted in a huge hue and cry and outrage in our country, because our administration, through this policy, created instant orphans of thousands of these immigrant children. So, I think it would behoove you to come to our committee and give us the kind of information that we would want to hear, because it would enable us to decide whether the current policies are being, where you're separating. We know you're still separating children. In fact, there have been reports that children are still being separated and not for particularly valid reasons. For example, the government even told a court in San Diego that they separated children because they didn't have enough time to confirm parentage to their satisfaction. So I'd like to know how many children are being separated for these kinds of reasons that you just didn't have time to figure out whether they were with their parents or not.
Yeah, we're talking about 0.5%. It's a very rare situation for the safety and welfare of the child under both executive and court order that we manage very carefully and keep track of.
Of course, it's your Border Patrol agents who are making these initial determinations. So it has to do with what kind of training they have and and, all of those kinds of issues. There's just a multiplicity of concerns that we have particularly for children who come to our country seeking asylum. Well, nobody wants to support fraud. That is very clear. Nobody wants to support open borders. But as we deal with this multifaceted problem, there are valid concerns that we have about how children are being treated. So, let's get another thing clear. In April 2019, multiple news reports indicated that President Trump offered to pardon you if you went to jail for following his desired policy of blocking entry of asylum seekers to the United States. And yes, you testified just now that you have not been asked to violate any laws, etc. But yes or no, has President Trump ever offered or suggested that he would pardon you if you implemented his legally suspect immigration policies, including denying entry to asylum seekers, even if you perceived the president's offer of pardoning you to keep you out of jail to be a joke?
I'm just going to repeat myself, Senator. I've not been asked to do anything unlawful, nor
No,
would I.
that is different. That is not the question I asked. The question is, has the president offered, even if you thought it might be unjust, offered to protect you if you ended up going to jail? No, I know you testified that you've not been asked to violate the law. So did he?
I think
Make
my
such a suggestion
answer
as was
stands.
reported in the news? Because that would be a source of major concern for a lot of us. I do have, Mr. Chairman, some other questions for the record, because it's a very complicated situation. And yes, we would all like to do the humane and appropriate things, including, by the way, we need to do more to stem the cartel's activities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono.